Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Robert Mitchell. I'm a cardiologist with over 40 years of experience working in community health centers across California. Even at the age of 81, I continue to work every day because I believe that what we've learned in life is worth sharing, especially when it can make a real difference in someone else's journey. Today, I'd like to talk about something that many older adults quietly worry about: memory decline. It's common to think that when our memory starts to slip, it must mean something is wrong with the brain, maybe even the early signs of dementia. But after decades of caring for patients, I can tell you this: that's not always the case. Many people I've seen over the years have described moments like forgetting a loved one's name or struggling to find the right word mid-conversation. And more often than not, the root cause isn't brain damage. It's tied to everyday habits. Things like sleep, diet, physical activity, and even social connection can have a major impact on how well our memory holds up. In this video, I'll be sharing some practical, non-medication strategies I've personally used for years to keep my memory sharp. I'll also tell you a few real stories of patients who were once struggling, but saw meaningful improvement just by making small, simple changes to their daily routines. And if you're thinking, it's too late for me, I'm too old to change anything now, I want you to hear this: it's not too late. The human body and the brain can adapt far longer than we often give them credit for. If any part of this video speaks to you or reminds you of someone you care about, I'd truly appreciate it if you shared your thoughts in the comments. You never know. Your story might be just what someone else needs to hear to take that first step toward change. I want to share a story that stayed with me because it clearly shows how much the body can affect memory, sometimes even more than what's happening in the brain itself. Not long ago, a man in his early 70s came to my clinic. He was well dressed, spoke calmly, and had once been the principal of a high school in the suburbs of Seattle. But from the very first moment, I noticed something unusual. Despite his polite manner, there was a quiet worry in his eyes. "I've been forgetting names of people close to me," he said softly. "Even my grandson's name. I blanked on it just last night. Do you think I might be developing dementia?" As he spoke, I noticed his hands were slightly trembling. His posture leaned a bit to one side, and while his voice was gentle, it lacked energy. These weren't necessarily signs of a brain issue. They often point to the overall state of the body. I asked him a few simple questions. "Have there been any changes in your daily routine lately?" He answered, "Ever since I retired, I don't have much of a schedule. I wake up late, watch TV through the morning, and often nap in the afternoon. I also don't go out or walk around like I used to." That response gave me a major clue. When I asked about his sleep, he mentioned waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and struggling for over an hour to fall back asleep. All of those things, lack of movement, limited natural light, disrupted sleep, can have a direct impact on memory. Many people don't realize that memory isn't just about the brain. It's the result of coordination between your body's internal clock, sleep quality, and physical activity. I gently explained to him, "The problem isn't in your brain. It's in the way your body is living day to day." Recent research, including reports from the National Institute on Aging, shows that inactivity during the day increases the risk of memory decline over time. When blood doesn't circulate efficiently to the brain, oxygen and nutrients don't reach it regularly, and that leads to memory lapses. I asked, "Do you get up at the same time every morning?" He shook his head. "No, I sleep whenever I'm tired and wake up whenever I feel rested." I suggested he start with something small. Wake up at the same time every day, ideally around 7 a.m., and open the curtains to let morning light fill the room. Then, take a short walk around the yard or hallway, depending on what his body can handle. I told him, before we train your brain to remember better, we need to help your body get back into rhythm. He smiled and said it had been a long time since he even thought about morning light. But that one comment told me he was ready to make a change. About a month later, he returned for a follow-up visit. When he walked into the room, I didn't look at his face right away. I looked down at his shoes. The first time he came in, I had noticed the soles of his shoes were worn unevenly on one side, a sign of poor posture or prolonged inactivity. But this time the soles were worn evenly on both sides. That said everything I needed to know. He'd been walking regularly. "I followed your advice," he said, his voice livelier. "At first, I could only walk a few minutes, but now I walk more than half an hour every morning." What touched me most wasn't the amount of time he walked. It was the change in his energy. His eyes were brighter, his voice more confident. Then he said something that I believe any grandfather would find deeply meaningful. "Lately, I remember my grandson's name the moment I see him. No more struggling or circling around it." That was a major breakthrough, and it didn't come from medication or complicated memory exercises. It started with something very simple, resetting his daily routine and getting regular exposure to daylight. To some, these kinds of changes might sound too basic, but in truth, the brain doesn't work in isolation. It depends on the entire body, from circulation and breathing to hormones, sleep, and muscle movement. In his case, resetting his internal clock helped improve his sleep quality. Morning walks boosted his circulation, increased endorphins, and regulated cortisol levels, leading to better mental clarity and emotional balance. And most importantly, he felt in control again. He wasn't being dragged down by fatigue or forgetfulness. He was steering his life forward, starting each day with intention. Not all memory changes start with something obvious. Sometimes, the earliest signs are subtle, hidden in the everyday routines we often take for granted. And by the time we notice something feels off, those changes may have already been in motion for a while. I remember a particular patient, Mrs. Margaret Lane, 74 years old, living with her husband in a quiet town in Oregon. The first time I met her, her husband had brought her into my office. "It's probably just my age, doctor," she said with a gentle smile. "I forget little things here and there, but that's normal when you get older, right?" It seemed harmless at first, but when I glanced at her husband, his face said something else. He explained that Margaret had not only been forgetting recent events, she'd also been repeating the same stories without realizing it. I asked her a few questions about her daily life. She admitted that she now relied on shopping lists to avoid forgetting what to buy. "But I suppose everyone does that, don't they?" she added, a bit unsure. The concern wasn't that she forgot an item or two. That can happen to anyone. The concern was that forgetfulness had become such a routine part of her day that it was quietly reshaping how she lived, without her even noticing. As I dug deeper, a few subtle but telling changes came to light. She had stopped doing embroidery, a hobby that once brought her joy. She no longer began her mornings with her usual self-care routine. Most days, she would just sit silently in front of the TV, not engaging with anything else. These were more than just habits slipping away. They were signs that her engagement with the world around her was fading before her memory truly began to. So I gently explained, "Dementia doesn't begin the day someone gets diagnosed. It often starts when our inner response to life, the things that once brought us meaning, begins to fade." Recent studies from the National Institute on Aging confirm this. A decline in interest and motivation in daily activities is one of the earliest signs of mild cognitive impairment. In other words, memory loss is often preceded by a quiet loss of spirit. I encouraged her to try setting aside just 10 minutes each morning to return to embroidery. No pressure to be perfect, just to reconnect with something familiar that once made her happy. She hesitated, then said quietly, "My hands aren't as steady as they used to be, but I still love the feel of thread between my fingers." To me, that one sentence was a breakthrough. It meant that her sense of connection was still there, just waiting for a spark. A week later, Margaret came back for a follow-up. She didn't say much at first, just placed a small piece of fabric on my desk. It wasn't finished, but it had been embroidered carefully. I looked at the cloth, then back at her face. Something was clearly different. "It's not perfect," she laughed, "but doing it in the morning clears my head. It feels like my brain is finally waking up." I asked what time she usually stitched. She said around 9 a.m., after opening the windows to let in some daylight. At first, she could only focus for 10 or 15 minutes, but by the end of the week, she was able to stay with it longer. She even started making breakfast for her and her husband again, instead of just waiting around. Her husband smiled and chimed in. She even asked me what kind of flower she should embroider tomorrow. I can't remember the last time she asked me something like that. What stood out to me wasn't just the return of memory, but also the improvement in her mood, focus, and even their relationship. And no medication could have done that. What helped was reviving a personal connection to herself. I explained to both of them. Simple activities like embroidery, gardening, or journaling aren't just hobbies. They help the brain stay sharp by strengthening coordination, memory, and emotional regulation, especially as we age. And I emphasized, you don't have to wait for a diagnosis. What matters most is noticing small changes and choosing to respond early. In geriatric medicine, we call this the quiet window, a stage when decline has just begun but can still be reversed with the right intervention. The signs are often so subtle: lack of motivation, less interaction, loss of interest, that they're mistaken as just part of getting old. But the truth is, during this early phase, the brain still responds well to the right kind of stimulation, especially things that reconnect us with happy memories, combine daylight exposure, and include light movement. Mrs. Margaret didn't need a complicated memory program. All she needed was a reason to start her morning with purpose. And that, slowly but surely, is what brought her memory and her spirit back. There's something many people don't realize. Memory isn't just about nutrition, exercise, or sleep. It also depends on something just as important: communication. Let me share a story about one of my patients, Mrs. Alina Reed, 78 years old. She hadn't come in for nearly a year. When she finally stepped into my office, she looked tired, though she still tried to keep her usual polite composure. But her eyes looked strangely empty, like she hadn't had a real conversation in days. "I don't remember the last time I actually talked to someone," she said softly, then turned her face away. She explained that after her husband passed, her daily routines began to shrink. She stopped going to cooking classes, stopped attending her local community gatherings, and even stopped calling her friends as often. These days, she mostly ordered food through an app and rarely went outside. Day after day, the only sound in her home was the television. I wrote in my notes, less interaction, less speaking, more isolation. Her voice was faint, broken, and she struggled to express herself fluently. When I asked if she'd been having any difficulties lately, she hesitated for a while, then said quietly, "Lately, I forget how to write my name in capital letters. I stare at the paper and it's just blank." That's when I understood the problem wasn't simply memory loss. It came from a deeper, prolonged absence of speech and social connection. I gently told her, The brain needs to be stimulated through language and interaction. When we stop speaking and stop sharing, the areas of the brain related to memory start to go quiet. A study by the U.S. National Institute on Aging supports this. People who keep up regular conversations, even simple ones, have a significantly lower risk of cognitive decline than those who live in long-term isolation. So I made a simple suggestion. Every morning, try reading the newspaper out loud for 5 minutes. It's not about the content. What matters is that your ears hear your own voice again. She looked surprised. That's it. Nothing more complicated. I nodded. That's right. It's the first step in reactivating your brain. About 4 weeks later, Mrs. Reed returned. From the moment she greeted me, I noticed a change in her voice. It was steadier, clearer, no longer broken up. Her face had more energy, her eyes looked brighter and more focused than before. "I've been reading out loud every morning just like you said," she told me. "At first, I could only manage a paragraph or two before getting tired. Now I can read an entire page." But what touched me most was when she added, "I called an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 5 years. When I said, 'Hi, it's me,' there was silence on the other end, and then she started crying. She said she never thought she'd hear my voice again. We talked for almost an hour, and when I hung up, I felt this warmth in my chest, literally." Her story wasn't just about reconnecting with an old friend. It was proof of something fundamental in geriatric medicine. Communication isn't just a social act, it's a natural neurological therapy. When I asked about the issue with writing her name, she smiled and said, "Not anymore. I write it at the end of each journal entry, every day, as a little reminder that I'm still here." That kind of change can't be measured by blood tests. But for any doctor who works with older adults, it's more encouraging than the results of any MRI. So I told her, honestly and from the heart, "Your voice is the switch for your memory. When you use it, you wake up the connections that have been lying dormant in your brain. And when you reconnect with others, your identity, the essence of memory, starts to come back." Long-term loneliness can quietly erode both cognitive and physical function. But even a single phone call, a single conversation, can shift that entire trajectory. I often tell my older patients, speak, even just one simple sentence. Call someone, even if it's just to say hello. It's not small talk, it's how you protect your memory. From my years of clinical experience, I've come to realize something that's often overlooked. Not all memory issues stem from poor nutrition. Sometimes, the real issue lies in how the body absorbs and processes food, and it starts with something as basic as chewing. I remember a patient named Mrs. Linda Foster, 75 years old. She came into my clinic looking worried and started with a sentence I hear a lot from older adults who care about their health. "Doctor, I eat 3 balanced meals a day, but my memory keeps getting worse. Lately, I forget people's names, and one time I even left the house without my wallet." I asked her more about her diet, and she told me she focused on eating healthy fish, vegetables, low sugar, low salt. But then I asked, "Do you tend to avoid foods that require a lot of chewing?" She looked a bit surprised and nodded. "Yes, I've been sticking to soft foods lately. My teeth aren't what they used to be, so I try to avoid anything tough or crunchy." That response made something click. Chewing, which seems like such a simple action, actually plays a much bigger role in brain function than most people realize. A 2018 study from Tokyo Dental University found that people who chew thoroughly show more activity in the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for storing memories. Chewing doesn't just help with digestion, it boosts blood flow, enhances neural communication, and supports better cognitive performance. I made a small suggestion to Mrs. Foster. Each day, try to include at least one food that requires more chewing. Maybe some roasted nuts, lightly steamed crunchy veggies, or even a slice of whole grain bread. You don't need a lot, just start by chewing more mindfully. She thought for a moment and said, "If it's just that, I think I can do it." 2 weeks later, she returned with a gentle smile and a noticeably more confident presence. "I've been eating more slowly, chewing more, especially brown rice and raw vegetables. After each meal, I feel more alert. Even my daughter said I sound more clear when I talk." What stood out to me wasn't just what she ate, it was the fact that she had become more present while eating. By focusing on chewing, she became more mindful of each bite, her pace of speech, and how she engaged at the table. I told her, every time your jaw muscles are active, your brain is receiving precise signals. It's not just mechanical, it's part of how the brain functions. Today, many older adults are turning to soft, easy-to-swallow foods, sometimes for convenience, sometimes out of fear of choking. But according to the U.S. Department of Health and Nutrition Services, the average number of chewing motions in older adults has dropped by about 25–30% over the past 30 years. That means memory loss isn't just about aging, it's also about how little we chew compared to the past. I often say to my patients, if you feel like your memory is slipping, don't rush into brain training apps or supplements just yet. First, take a look at what's on your plate and ask yourself, how many times did I actually chew today? When our memory starts to shift, it's natural to feel concerned, even a little scared. But the truth is, not every change calls for medication or complicated machines. Sometimes all it takes is stepping outside a bit earlier, calling an old friend, or simply chewing your food more mindfully, and that alone can begin to make a difference. We don't need to do anything dramatic, just paying attention to the little things we tend to overlook each day. That, in itself, is one of the most powerful ways to keep our memory sharp and our spirit connected to life. If today's video spoke to you in any way, if you found yourself thinking, "That's exactly how I felt," I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone out there needs to hear. And if you find this kind of content helpful, consider hitting subscribe. Not just to follow a channel, but so we can keep meeting here, in these honest conversations made for what might be the most meaningful chapter of our lives. Wishing you a calm, comforting day. And after this video ends, I hope you take a moment to do one small thing for yourself, like a gentle hello to your memory.